It is 7:30 in the morning in Van Horn, Texas. From New York City for our audience worldwide, good morning, good morning. Live on Bloomberg TV and radio. And for our audience on Bloomberg QuickTake, Tom Keene, T-minus 30.
T-minus 30, and with the astronauts, I'm going to call them that, John. I don't know when the pins go on and all that, but the 4 astronauts up the tower and ready to walk across the bridge. Really exciting, John. And what's so important here is the idea of the 4 returning to space in such an original position without a pilot and with really a control center that's not so much controlling. It's all computers on board.
Fully autonomous in that capsule, Tom. The mission officially known as NS-16. Like something straight out of a movie script. In a small town in West Texas, the richest man in the world going into space, Tom, with his brother, an 82-year-old icon, and a teenager. You really couldn't write this and make it up yourself, Tom.
Well, some of the symbolism there and the differences here of Branson, Bezos, and Musk, and of course, Mr. Musk watching with SpaceX, which has had many, many more flights. But, John, what is so important to me, and I mentioned this earlier, is unlike Mercury and Gemini, which were shocking in their lack of testing as we raced the Russians 60 years ago, this has been with a fair amount of testing. This actual rocket, this is the 4th flight.
Tom, let's go through the play-by-play for the next 30 minutes or so. For our audience, what you can see on the screen right now, if you're joining us on radio, are the 4 astronauts to be preparing to go into the capsule. They've ascended the tower. We're waiting for them to go into the capsule, ingress in the crew capsule, so to speak, Tom. Once they get the go, that's going to take place in the next couple of minutes' time. And then, Tom, from there, you secure the crew capsule. And then from there, at about the top of the hour, 9 Eastern time, about 8 local, what are we going to get, Tom? It's launch time, T-minus 28.
It'll be an 11-minute flight up suborbital to 62 miles. The images right now, and for those of you on Bloomberg Radio, it is the stark West Texas, I'm going to call it Plains, John. And Mr. Bezos just came in and bought a 600-acre ranch in his place, Cape Canaveral there.
Shall we talk about the moment we're in, Tom? The battle that so many people have talked about between the billionaires, Mr. Branson, Sir Richard Branson, the billionaires, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos. This operation today, Tom, this mission has been criticized so much by so many people. How divisive is this moment for you, Tom?
It's not divisive in that we've been there before, all the way through Mercury and, frankly, pre-Mercury, Gemini and Apollo, and onto the space station and space shuttle. There was a cost rationalization of what we were doing. Maybe, John, describe this moment here before we go to Emily Chang at Van Horn.
So the astronauts to be have ascended the tower, Tom. They're now going to cross the bridge momentarily towards the crew capsule. Once they get the go, they will ingress the crew capsule. The hatch will then close, and then we have to wait a little moment, Tom. Wait about 25 minutes or so to make that trip before we take off. Jeff Bezos on the screen, Tom, the first across the bridge alongside his brother. And there we are. Tom, what a moment for the 82-year-old aviation icon. What a moment for her. She has waited a long, long time for this to happen.
Wally Funk is original. We're not going to describe her esteemed career as an Oklahoma Aggie, but what we can say is Emily Chang has been with the astronauts at the center outside of Van Horn, Texas. Emily, what have you seen about Team Bezos as they prepare for this flight?
The energy here, Tom, is palpable. And as they prepare to load into that crew capsule, we're told it's going to be a very sensory experience for them. They're going to hear the engine venting, and suddenly it's all going to become real, that they are going up to space in a matter of minutes. And as you said, it's a quick 11-minute flight. I think about it like a couple of roller coasters back to back. So it's going to be quick, and it's hopefully for Jeff Bezos going to be his dream come true, a dream come true for Wally Funk, and perhaps once they go and come, they will have that experience of change, that astronauts report of seeing that spectacular view of Earth that you can only get from outside the atmosphere.
John Ferro mentions Ms. Funk at 82 years old. Tell us of the medical care for an 82-year-old with 3 Gs going up and 5 or 6 Gs coming down.
So, what's interesting is that these astronauts weren't medically evaluated for this flight. The idea is that ultimately just anyone can go up and down. You don't have to have special astronaut training. You don't have to have been preparing for this all your life, though Wally Funk seems to be in great shape, and she certainly has great energy. There are some height requirements. There are some weight requirements. They need to get up those 7 flights of stairs to the crew capsule in a matter of 90 seconds. They need to be able to zip up into a flight suit. But that's basically it. They've gone through 2 days of training, 14 hours altogether, some demos, some simulations, some emergency simulations. But the idea is that just anyone ultimately will be able to take this ride.
And Tom Keene, I make that 1, 2, 3, 4 crew members in that capsule now. Jeff Bezos the first to walk in. You can just about see Wally Funk through that window.
That's
and
so
Tom,
cool.
As I understand it, these windows are the largest windows that have been into space.
Oh, yeah.
Because let's be clear about this. For any tourist going into space, going past the Kármán line, you want 2 things. You want that experience of zero gravity, and you want to be able to experience that full view of the curvature of the Earth. And that's what that design is for.
I had the immense privilege, John, of talking to the late Michael Collins about the windows in orbit and what you could see, and the improvements were made by astronauts screaming from the 6-inch porthole that Alan Shepard had in 1961. And they were so angry. Gus Grissom had a window carved into his Liberty capsule as well. Tim Stenovec with us as well with Bloomberg QuickTake. Tim, what do you see?
Hey, good morning from West Texas. Well, the sun is just rising here in Van Horn. It's about 69, 70 degrees, winds about 7 miles an hour. It's a cool morning here, and what I see are a lot of people who are excited about what's going on today. Look, locals, they're telling me that this is the biggest thing that's happened in their decades of living here. They're certainly excited about it. The town has only 2,000 people, but also tourists who are totally unaffiliated with Blue Origin, people who are just interested to see what's happening. As I've been sitting here getting set up for the last hour, guys, several people have stopped just to ask me, hey, where's the best place to watch this? Someone came over to my car and said he flew in all the way from New York City just to watch this. So this is the second Blue Origin launch he has seen. So it's certainly doing that job that Jeff Bezos is hoping it's doing of inspiring people.
Tim, you're a student of this. What is the significance, and we've seen the fumes off the rocket, of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen as well? I mean, it's very traditional rocketry, isn't it?
Yeah, what's interesting about this is that technology actually hasn't changed in terms of propulsion significantly in many, many years. There are a lot of similarities between this and earlier types of engines that have been developed. At the same time, though, what we are seeing is a lot of progress in terms of reusability. That is the key innovation here. This particular stack, the capsule and the booster, has already been flown twice and tested twice. This is the specific one that is used for space. This is the specific one that is used for tourists, I should say. In addition to that, guys, what we're also seeing right now are the final checks that they are going through as they do get prepared for flight.
Fully autonomous capsule here. Any evaluations that take place on board whatsoever, Tim? I think we've lost the sound over there to Tim. Tom, just moments away, in the next couple of minutes on my screen, T-minus 25. In the next couple of minutes, T-minus 24, I think we expect that hatch to close.
Some of this, John, is a tension of what happens with rocketry, and as other astronauts have said, it's a stick of dynamite putting a capsule up 62 miles. The capsule can unhinge from the rocket at any time, John. This is a decision made on the ground, not by Mr. Bezos and the other 3 travelers, but from a safety standpoint, you can bring the capsule apart. Emily Chang, describe the festivities last night. I saw a video of Miss Chang diving for the food as Mr. Bezos prepared it.
Yes, Tom, we got a surprise visitor yesterday afternoon. Jeff Bezos and his brother showed up bearing the gift of food, which nobody here in the middle of the desert will turn down. He was carrying his mother's favorite recipe, chicken thighs, black-eyed peas, mac and cheese. I have to say, it was pretty good. He even gave us the recipe. How generous of him. Didn't take too many questions,
John,
but said he was excited, still excited. That is the sentiment he has echoed all along. We haven't caught a bit or even a sense of nerves. Who knows if that's changed now that he is officially on board.
John, that dinner is health friendly. I just hope they have Chang on board.
You just want to know if you can get served alcohol on this trip, Tom.
No,
that's all you're trying to find out.
That awaits other flights as well. But I do hope, like the Gemini missions, that there's Chang on board. That would be important.
Emily, as we await this hatch to be closed, I just wonder from your perspective, if you know, the evaluations that need to take place by the crew members? Do they literally just sit there and do nothing? We've been told it's fully autonomous. What do they have to do from here?
They got to strap themselves in, John, and when they're told to unstrap, they unbuckle, and they get a 30-second warning from mission control when they're supposed to buckle back up and come back down. As I said, it's pretty minimal instruction, minimal training. The pressure, though, as we understand it, as they accelerate up into the air and get up to Mach 3 or 3 times the speed of sound, they'll feel 3 times the force of gravity. So basically imagine your body weight times 3 pressing down on you. You'll be pushed down back into the seat, but as they continue upward into the air, that weight will lighten until they get to 0 Gs, that 3 to 4 minutes of weightlessness that Jeff Bezos, that Wally Funk have been waiting for all their lives. And it'll be a quick trip. It'll be buckle up just a couple of minutes later, and then they're on their way back down. It'll all depend on those parachutes that'll carry the crew capsule back down to Earth, slow it down, and then as soon as they get to about 60 miles above ground, the retro thrust systems, as it calls, will kick in. It's basically a cushion of air that will cushion the crew capsule as it lands, hopefully safely, in a cloud of desert dust.
Just a final check of the harnesses here now, Tom. That hatch is about to be closed, and then it's T-minus 22.
It is T-minus 22, and John, you know, again, I'm going to go back to all that we have experienced from Mercury through Gemini, Apollo, and all this huge space shuttle tragedy that was just so difficult. I'm going to just state that within the happy talk and, you know, pork and beans and all that is a lot of risk. There's always risk to space flight, and we'll have to watch the launch as it goes through those first steps. There's that key point 6 or 7 minutes into it, 3 minutes into it, where they reach the physics of the greatest tension.
Tom, just checking in the astronauts. Let's take a listen and see if we can hear what's going on.
Loud and clear. Thanks for everything, Sarah. We appreciate it.
It's my honor and my pleasure. All right, astronauts, we are at T-minus 21 minutes and counting. As we proceed, I'll keep you updated. For now, just sit back and relax.
Final comms, Tom, just ahead of takeoff, the hatch about to be closed. The harnesses have been checked. The communication between the astronauts is almost complete, Tom. It is T-minus 21.
And again, a reuse capsule, reuse this and that. Tim Stenovec, I believe, is still with us. Tim, talk to us about the 14 previous flights of Blue Origin.
Yeah, this is something that they've been testing for years, the New Shepard. Part of the testing, guys, included what happens during a disaster. So they had 3 separate tests, specifically just to show what happens during a disaster. And they were able to successfully deploy and separate the capsule from the booster 3 different times at all 3 portions of flight. So they were able to do it once during launch, they were able to do it once prior to launch, and they were able to do it once from space, and they were also able at one point, guys, to do it as the rocket was going up. And what that did was it demonstrated that the crew can safely escape from at any point during the flight. And I should note, I did lose you guys and lose your audio, so I'll have to check back in with you in a few minutes.
Okay, well, we'll wait for you to check in. Some technical problems on our end, no technical problems on their end. Hopefully, Tom, the hatch has been closed. It's T-minus 20 until launch time.
Well, T-minus 20 with the hatch closed, and John, you expect what's going to be after this. Let's assume a very successful flight, and then on we go to further testing before the Glenn mission, maybe a year and a half, 2 years out, which is a 2-stage rocket into orbit. So it's very much of the pattern we saw from Mercury to Gemini.
Tom, it is the what next of this that gets your attention, isn't it? What next?
Yes.
And I reflected on this moment around about an hour ago on Bloomberg TV and radio, and I'll do it again. I think many people are very, very quick to throw mud at innovation like this, throw mud at an effort like this. And I think of Jeff Bezos' Amazon in the late 90s, Tom, and many people questioning what it could become. Why did it have the valuation it had when it was just an online bookseller? The embrace of snark was almost immediate, and I just wonder, Tom, whether we have to be really humble about this moment when we look back in 10 years, 20 years' time, on what this could develop into, what this could become.
Well, I think everybody's, lived this their lives. I mean, I have the clearest memory, John, of being in a NASA family and literally neighbors down the street and next door, dead set against the NASA program. In the early morning of West Texas, we await a launch. Right now, we are thrilled to bring you, without question, this nation's expert on Amazon. Brad Stone has written on Jeff Bezos. Brad Stone knows the story better than anyone I know. Brad, your thoughts on Mr. Bezos into space. Frame his path in his life to this moment.
Yeah, hey Tom. You know, this is a story that started probably 40 years ago when he spent his summers with his grandparents at their ranch in South Texas, and his grandfather had worked on the space program. Bezos got the space bug watching the Apollo moon landings. He gave his speech at his high school. He was the valedictorian about space travel, and really he's been consistent with the vision. That speech was all about opening up the space frontier, having humans living and working in space, and today is the first step on that journey. It's been a long path. He founded Blue Origin in 2000. The company hasn't had a lot of success to show for it, but as you mentioned, they're working on orbital rockets and moon landers, often in competition with SpaceX. But today, even though it's a more modest suborbital flight, it's an important step for Bezos and for Blue Origin.
Brad, I've tried to be transparent and balanced about the moment we're in right now because myself, Tom, others get a lot of criticism for covering an event like this. This is an event that is very, very divisive. Jeff Bezos has taken a lot of criticism about it. How has he confronted that issue as he makes these kind of steps forward?
He's ignored it. I mean, he's someone who probably has pretty thick skin over the years, being criticized for so many things at Amazon, some quite justifiably. But as Emily mentioned earlier, there's kind of a palpable excitement here in West Texas right now. The criticism seems kind of distant. I'm sure we'll return to it in the press conference later today. But Bezos is just consistent. He's got this long-term vision. He kind of knows that not everyone's going to buy into it. But, you know, he's been right about these things before, particularly with Amazon. I'm not saying he's right here. It seems kind of wacky, this idea of millions of humans working and living in space one day, generations from now. But, you know, he believes in it. It's his money. He's got $200 billion, and this is what he wants to spend his money and his time doing.
Now, Brad, Blue Origin actually has 2 astronauts on staff, and the understanding among employees was that those astronauts would be the first to fly on the New Shepard. Instead, Jeff Bezos seemed to surprise many people, saying it would be him. In all your years reporting on Amazon and all your years reporting on Bezos, did you ever think he'd be the first person to ride on his own rocket?
Yeah, definitely not. I don't think a lot of Blue engineers and executives thought that he would be going first. As you say, 2 ex-NASA astronauts are on staff. The idea was that they would go first and kind of test the customer experience. But in some ways, it's consistent. I mean, Bezos is all about bold moves. He uses the word adventure, swashbuckling adventure. And right, this is the greatest adventure that there is. And he's sending a signal here to his company and to the world that he believes in the spacecraft, he believes in the mission, and he's willing to put himself at some small amount of risk to go see it to fruition.
Now, Bezos is doing this just a couple of weeks after stepping down as CEO of Amazon. He has said he could have done this as CEO of Amazon, but do you believe that? Do you buy that? Or do you think this was part of some sort of coordinated timeline? He wanted to do this, but not while he was CEO.
I mean, it does appear orchestrated, right? That he would have announced his resignation as CEO back in, what was it, late January, and then stepping aside in early July, and now a few weeks later going to space. I mean, I think if Blue Origin had readied New Shepard 2 years ago, when it was supposed to launch, the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, he probably would have gone as CEO. But like, it's just neater now. It's cleaner. You don't have Amazon investors maybe worrying as much. So no, I don't think it's an accident.
We are 15 minutes away from the first human flight for Blue Origin's New Shepard. You can hear a round of applause from the headquarters of Blue Origin. You can see Jeff Bezos just inside the capsule. The final checks taking place, Tom. They're secured in their harnesses. We've had the final communications. The hatch is closed. It's T-minus 15.
Yeah, again, T-minus 15, and you wonder about the sequencing here as well. What's interesting with the modern technology of liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen, John, it is a shockingly simple system. It is radically simpler, cleaner, and better than what we were used to years ago. Remember the Saturns, they'd start flaming up ages before they take off. This is a piece of cake with a much less heavy payload as well. Right now, as we prepare for this launch, we want to bring in Chad Anderson with Space Capital, a managing partner, but far more than that, a student of the space industry. And we're thrilled that Mr. Anderson could join us this morning. Thank you for being so patient as we show the moment as well. Frame this when we look back 5 years from now.
This is incredibly exciting to watch. I mean, space used to be a domain that was reserved for just a few of us. And it's opening up like never before. And you can see that in the diversity of this crew. I mean, the richest person in the world and his brother, sure, but you've also got the oldest and the youngest person ever to go to space. No medical checks, completely autonomous vehicle, clean burning fuel that the emissions are water vapor. Multiple aborts throughout, incredibly safe, much safer than any vehicle that we've flown before.
What's the path here to orbital flight? Can people say that tourism is going to be, you're going to go up like Glenn and go 3 times around the Earth?
So that's the plan. And Bezos says that actually it's like landing a rocket is like balancing a broomstick. And so actually a larger broomstick is easier to balance. And so his argument is that this new Shepard is actually much harder to land. And so by doing this, then he's, taken the greatest steps forward towards his New Glenn rocket.
Tom, just an update here. The countdown has been paused at T-minus 15. That taking place just in the last 60 seconds or so.
Well, that can happen. It is not weather, as Tom Stenovec said. It's really quite good weather out there. So we'll have to see what that announcement is. Again, safety is the major precaution as we wait for that hold to come off. With us now, Janet Kavandi, Sierra Space Executive Vice President, and she is a former NASA astronaut as well. Will these be astronauts, astronaut Kavandi?
Well, technically speaking, once you pass that 62-mile mark, you will be in space and therefore have traveled in space, which is the definition of an astronaut. Not necessarily a career astronaut, but an astronaut nonetheless.
What is so interesting here is the simplicity of the systems. Identify this experience versus our stereotype of Ron Howard's, the right stuff and the rest of it, Apollo 13, all the back and forth of hundreds and hundreds of people. How do you experience this simplicity Mr. Bezos has invented?
I think it's very elegant. The more we learn what we need and what we don't need. He has gone a very simplistic route. I think it's a wonderful achievement for someone who's essentially done this on his own because of his own desire to go in space, his own desire to see the Earth from that viewpoint. And I think he will continue to do great things, bigger and better things, just like NASA did through the generation and the evolution of the rockets that came before this one.
Janet, I understand we will have the oldest and the youngest, both the oldest and the youngest ever into space. Can you walk me through the degree of training that these particular astronauts-to-be have experienced versus what would have been experienced 10, 20 years ago for a similar mission?
Probably not all that different. I mean, you have your spacesuits that you have to learn how to operate. If there are any emergencies, you have those kinds of equipment that you have to learn to do an egress from. When you go up to space, you have to unbuckle and then float around without kicking each other in the head. Then you have to get back in your seat, which is probably one of the more trying things to do since you'll only be there for a few minutes. And then get yourself in a safe position so that you can come back down and land without hurting anyone. So, and then probably an emergency egress out of the capsule once they have landed. So those kinds of things are what you practice, just in case something, somewhere we're not there or something were to go wrong, you can help yourself get out of the vehicle.
Janet, just experiencing a brief hold here at T-minus 15. How typical are things like this to have a brief hold 15 minutes out?
Oh, very, very typical. I don't think there was ever a space flight that I was on that didn't have a hold at some point during the countdown. Sometimes they're built in and sometimes they're unexpected. It does kind of, raise the tension inside the cockpit because you're excited and you want to go and there may be a delay. But it is it doesn't matter. In the end, whenever you fly, it is all worth it.
Astronaut Kavandi, I've got to get in a geek question here because it's something we have not talked about as we've prepared for this launch today. Your PhD at Washington is in analytical chemistry and in materials science. How original are the materials of this Blue Origin rocket and capsule versus our stereotypes sitting in the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum?
I mean, I think they're all relatively similar. Every evolution, like I mentioned earlier, you try to learn something new, use a better material, a better fuel, less toxic fuels, less toxic materials. As you well know, Jeff is all about the environment and keeping the planet healthy and making it a safer place. And longevity of the Earth is really paramount in his mind. So he wants to protect the Earth. So I'm sure he's gone to every extent to try to use the least toxic materials possible.
For our audience worldwide on Bloomberg TV and radio, and for our audience joining us over on Bloomberg QuickTake, we've been on hold now for a little more than 6 minutes, Tom, at T-minus 15. Just a brief hold that's lasted about 6 minutes as we await Blue Origin's first human flight. 6 minutes we've been on hold at T-minus 15, Tom.
We'll see. We'll have to see where this goes. As the astronaut tells us, this is not unusual. Janet Kavandi, I've got to talk about the fresh air of your Missouri, coming out of Carthage there in the University of Missouri, and Wally Funk to the south in Oklahoma. What is it about the Midwest aviation heritage that puts people like you into space?
You know, I've thought about that a lot. There are a lot of Midwesterners that love to go to space. I don't know. I think in part for me, at least, it was seeing the night sky from the Midwest. It's very beautiful. You can see all the stars. You can see the Milky Way. And it's just so majestic when you look at space from that vantage point. And I know from a very young age, I would tell my dad that I wanted to go up there and see what it would be like to be in space and look back at the Earth. So maybe it's that, and maybe it's just that, you know, there's not the other distractions that you have in a more urban life. You know, you have time to dream, you have time to look out there, you have time to think about exploring. So maybe a combination of all those things is what inspires us Midwesterners.
Dr. Kavandi, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. With Sierra Space, their Executive Vice President, of course, a NASA astronaut and former director of NASA's Glenn Research Center. John?
Tom, I'm sure I'll upset some people by cutting in and doing this, but nothing can peel me away from the bond market for too long. We will have full coverage on the markets in about 34 minutes' time. Your bond market, Tom, is bid. Yields are lower by 4 basis points, a 114 handle. And speaking of 14, T-minus 14 right now, Tom.
Oh,
the countdown
nice,
clock
Segui. Very good.
I just saved myself from all the criticism, didn't I, TK? There we go, with T-minus 14.
Yeah, we'll have a Treasury bill with 1 minute to go. We'll go to the Treasury bill analysis as well. John?
Emily Chang still with us at the Blue Origin Launch Center. Emily, a slight delay here, T-minus 14. What's behind the hold-up?
Slight delay. Look, delays in space launches are happen a lot, and so we've been told there is a few hour window that this can take off this morning. If it gets beyond a few hours, it's too long for the astronauts to sit in there. It's too long for everyone to sit in mission control, and it'll likely be moved to tomorrow. At this point, I spoke to the head of design for the New Shepard, who's been working at Blue Origin for 17 years. At this point, it's the unknown unknowns that could cause the issue. I mean, as far as all of the known quantities, they have checked everything off their checklist, and at this point, it's the unknown things that could possibly come up. One of which is weather. I mean, we were driving through thunderstorms last night. We were sitting here with rain and lightning. I'm told that's typical in the West Texas desert in the afternoon. In the mornings, it is clearer, and that's why they have scheduled a morning launch. They've been testing out the weather for the last 48 hours with weather balloons. That's very typical for a space launch, and up to this point, up to this brief hold, it was all systems go. So no clear reason for the delay. I will say it is not unusual. It should not cause alarm, and we'll just have to wait it out and see.
The countdown clock has resumed at T-minus 13 now. We continue the countdown almost at T-minus 12. Emily, you mentioned to our colleague Brad Stone a little bit earlier on about maybe, and I'm going to say it this way, you didn't, just maybe a little bit of division over at Blue Origin about who went up first. The first human flight for Blue Origin, and Jeff Bezos takes center stage. Can you just walk me through that dynamic?
You know, I wouldn't necessarily call it division. Blue Origin has 2 astronauts on staff, and the understanding was that those 2 astronauts would be the first to fly the first crewed mission. And it surprised people even here. I believe in a good way that Jeff Bezos was going to be the first person on that flight. It is a huge vote of confidence for what they've been working on here for 21 years. It is an expression of his faith in the company, the faith of his rocket ship. And ultimately, he sort of said, look, how can I expect anyone else to go up if I can't go up myself? And so, yes, this has been his lifelong dream, but he is also the founder of this company, and it's a huge validation and a huge statement that he is putting himself out there as the guinea pig. Now, it is a completely autonomous system. If he was a trained astronaut, he wouldn't necessarily be able to do much more than a regular person, and that's the whole idea of this flight, that you can get on it with little training, go up and down, and have that experience that's so far been limited to mostly government craft and professional astronauts.
Tim Stenovec, your thoughts, please, at distance from the launch pad.
Yeah, I'm about 35 miles from the launch pad, and I will say the wind has significantly picked up where I am. We're still seeing a lot of excitement on the ground. Several people just in the last few minutes have stopped by asking us where the best place to actually see this is. I was talking to some folks from Blue Origin yesterday, and they did say that when we're here, even though we are miles away from the landing site in the town of Van Horn in West Texas, we will still hear sonic booms. The sonic booms will not necessarily be able to be heard from the booster because that is so loud, but we will be able to hear them as the capsule re-enters. Also, what you hear behind me is a freight train. Happens very, very frequently here in Van Horn, and happening as it's going right behind me, guys.
Tim, this is where you throw back and really quickly.
That was
Bloomberg
very good.
QuickTake's Tim
Very
Stenovec.
smooth.
Tim, thank you. Tom Keene, it's T-10. 10 minutes and 40 seconds away.
Well, 10 minutes and 40 seconds away from a launch. And again, John, I really want to emphasize, I love the scale of this project. Again, 60 feet tall. Chad Anderson with us as well as we consider this flight. And Chad, to me, what has been so important is it's a suborbital launch. This is a little rocket. It's almost a charming rocket.
It is, yeah. And I mean, it's a more traditional route than the space plane that we saw fly 9 days ago. You know, what's so interesting for us as investors in this category is that in the same way that it's opening up for passengers and for travelers, it's opening up for businesses as well.
What would be a business application here?
So SpaceX has lowered the barriers to entry in a way that we have not seen before. So tourism is one category of many that we're watching in the space economy.
We're going to grow tomatoes up there? I mean, give me an applied application here for Mr. Bezos or Mr. Musk or anyone that would follow.
So tourism is one piece of this. The data is really what we're after as investors. The data from satellites in space are what enable us to understand and address the greatest global challenges. It's what allows us to see over the horizon and do business with the people over there. It's the invisible backbone that powers our global economy.
Forgive me for jumping in, Chad. We keep talking about the degree of criticism this kind of flight has also taken. Can you walk us through the innovation that is on this particular flight that is helping us advance, helping us make the steps forward that you'd like to see?
Well, so first of all, it's a new rocket designed for commercial passengers. So everything from the cabin, I've been inside this cabin, and it's extremely large. It's spacious. When they unclip, they can float around. There's plenty of space for them to do that in that dome structure.
How high is the ceiling?
I would say, I don't know for sure, but inside, I mean, it's 12 feet.
12 feet ceiling?
It's big enough for me to stand on my head, probably.
Big enough to do somersaults, Tom. That's what you need to be able to do inside there.
Can you see me doing a somersault?
I can't see you doing a somersault, Tom. I bet you that our 82-year-old aviation icon is doing somersaults up there, but I imagine she's slightly fitter than you. Wally Funk is without a doubt fitter than you.
Yes, we can state that.
Tom, for that matter as well.
Please make a banner of that.
Chad, let's talk about investable opportunities away from just tourism. What are they?
So there has been, since SpaceX removed the barriers to entry 10 years ago, things have opened up in a considerable way. So before, there was really, a handful of defense contractors on one side and the government on the other. It was a very limited market. with the barriers to entry removed, you can now start a business. You know how much it costs to get to orbit. You can go out and raise capital, venture capital for these businesses. You can be a founder of a company. You can work for a company. You can now go to space. So there are a number of ways in which we're seeing increased participation in the space race, and we're seeing that today. 20 years of work and effort that's gone into building these vehicles, and they're coming together within 9 days of each other. That's no coincidence, right? Competition is driving the innovation and the progress here.
Yep.
And at the same time, you've got SpaceX has done a static fire of their super heavy booster yesterday that's going to connect with our Starship and take us into orbit and the moon and into deep space. So on that end, there's some very interesting opportunities. We're really interested in the data, in Earth observation, the satellites that are being launched by these rockets that are gathering unprecedented amount of new data about our planet. Big tech is getting into the game. Microsoft and Amazon are very interested in getting this data onto their cloud for the storage and compute and for the value-added services that come on top of that. And the applications that are being built on top of this data are in trillion-dollar industries like agriculture, insurance, maritime, logistics, you name it. So this is opening up in a way that GPS did for us. And GPS is the most successful space technology in existence, has generated trillions of dollars in economic value and some of the largest venture outcomes we've ever seen. The same thing is happening in Earth observation and geospatial intelligence and in satellite communications with Starlink and Amazon's Project Kuiper and OneWeb. Connecting the planet in a way that it hasn't ever been connected before, and all the applications that are coming on the back of that.
We are now T-6, Tom. Then it's over to the command center to start the engines. Liftoff should be several seconds after that. T-6, Tom.
I want to describe here again the traditional rocketry, John, and the idea that this is liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. And we all learned, John, at one point in high school physics, that means cold. These are processes that are ice cold, way below anything we know in Fahrenheit, Celsius, down near the Kelvin level, 100, 200 degrees plus colder, and that's a key thing at launch.
T-5, let's head back over to Bloomberg's Quick Takes. Tim Stenovec. Tim, Blue Origin, New Shepard. Let's speak to the Shepard piece of that name. Alan Shepard's 1961 mission, how different this is compared to that.
Yeah, look, there are a lot of similarities. At the core, they're both sending people into space. Shepard went significantly higher, 116.5 miles above the Earth's surface. He also ended up much further from the launch area. His flight was just a few minutes longer, though. Also, very different objectives here. The autonomy, too, versus the fact that Shepard had to pilot elements of it himself. Finally, guys, it has a lot to do with vacation, right? This is an experience. This is supposed to provide a vacation. This is supposed to be something that tourists experience. Think about the message that the United States was sending the world in 1961 when it did put Alan Shepard up there. One other thing that I will note about this is Shepard's rocket wasn't even as powerful as Blue Origin's rocket, the New Shepard that is sending these 4 astronauts into space in just a few minutes. And once again, part of the challenges of being in the field, I have lost my audio, so I'm going to send it back to you guys in New York.
That keeps happening, Tim. We appreciate it, though. We appreciate your time. We're inside the final 5, T-4. Let's head back over to Emily Chang. Emily, walk us through what we're about to see in about 4 or 5 minutes' time, and then from there, the next 25 minutes or so.
All right, John, 4 or 5 minutes time, and when the countdown clock gets to 0, you still got 7 more seconds before actual liftoff, but that is when the engines will light. The rocket will shoot up vertically in the air. About 2.5 minutes in, there will be separation. The crew capsule will separate from the booster. They will both continue on past the Kármán line. The crew capsule will go higher than the booster itself. That is when they will experience that weightlessness for 3 to 4 minutes. They'll be told to buckle back up with a 30-second warning, and they will make their way back down. They will be descending via parachute, so we are looking for full inflation with those parachutes. Once they land, and by the way, the booster will land on a landing pad in a specific location. The crew capsule will land somewhere in the area. Now, they know where they think it's going to land. They have a bunch of vehicles, I believe it's those Rivian trucks, stationed on a grid pattern, and they are all ready to zoom in to retrieve Jeff Bezos and his crew as soon as that landing happens. We are taking bets on who will emerge first. I think Jeff Bezos is going to be the first to open that hatch, but John and Tom, I'm curious, who you expect to see first.
Well, I would see Mrs. Funk ladies first to exit.
Well, that's the polite thing to do, but Tom, it was
True.
Jeff Bezos who was the first in the capsule, I think, so maybe he'll be the first to exit too.
John, at T-minus 2 minutes and plus here, I think it's important, as Mr. Stenovec mentioned, we have wind in Van Horn, and as Emily mentioned, there are 3 parachutes. Out in the oceans of Cape Canaveral and Cape Kennedy, this was always a very serious issue. Depending on where the astronauts came down in the water, it could be distant from an aircraft carrier.
Tom, we talked about this a little bit earlier. Let's do it again, because I always find this part the most fascinating. We're at T-minus 2 now. Then after the launch, we get the booster and the capsule, and they separate. And they separate at about 76 kilometers altitude. The capsule is going to go to about 106 kilometers. That's where they'll experience that zero gravity. They'll unstrap. They'll take in the curvature of the Earth. But that separation, Tom, and the booster returning to Earth, that is quite something to see.
Yeah, well, it's going to be something to see. And again, you're going to see 2 images up, folks, going up only 62 miles. I would hope that we will have camera images of not only the booster and the separated capsule at the same time, and then the return of the rocket, which, John, you and I mentioned, we're still not used to.
So 8 minutes after the launch, Tom, the reusable New Shepard booster should land. And I understand we should get some pictures of that, and we'll do our best to bring them to you. And then 11 minutes after the end, after that, Tom, the crew capsule lands. So this is going to be very quick. Once the launch takes place, a lot of this is going to take place very quickly. We're T-minus 1.
And we should mention good morning on Bloomberg Radio across this nation and around the world as well. We'll give you the image as much as we can for Bloomberg Radio. John, I'm going to give it over to you right now as we really get finally down to the final countdown.
For our audience worldwide on Bloomberg TV, on Bloomberg Radio, for our audience on Bloomberg QuickTake, the mission is officially known as NS-6D. The script is like something out of a movie. The richest man in the world taking his brother, an 82-year-old aviation icon and a teenager, in the first human flight for Blue Origin. It is 54 seconds away. We're going to hand over and listen into the command center and the communications that take place. We will not interrupt this. We are 45 seconds out.
T-minus 16, guidance internal. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4. Command engine start. 2, 1. Max Q. feet, Mach 1.
Doesn't it, Gary?
It is totally different.
All right, you can follow along, of course, the speedometer in the bottom left, the altimeter in the middle of the screen there. so far appears to be a nominal flight. All right, coming up here on MECO, main engine cutoff. That will be followed shortly by separation. And at that point, after separation, we're gonna let the astronaut unbuckle and take in the freedoms of zero G. There is MECO, main engine cutoff. A beautiful shot down the New Shepard rocket. Look at that view. Unreal. Awaiting separation here.
Tom, that vision, that view never
And here
gets
we are.
old.
You can start to see.
And the speed here, John, is very, very important here. This is not orbital speed of 16, 17, 18,000 miles per hour, but nevertheless, thrust to get up into space well over 1,000 miles per hour. And John, the feet being added here out to the 62-mile point. We have passed the point of the great physics tension of the rocket and the capsule, now waiting for that separation.
The separation set to take place in its entirety, Tom, in about 4 minutes and 30 seconds. Let's head back to Emily Chang to walk us through the next 10 minutes or so. Emily.
All right, John. So look, on the left-hand corner of your screen, you see the countdown clock, the speed going down. When that gets to zero, that is the peak of the flight, or apogee, as they say in the space industry. That is when they will be feeling those 3 to 4 minutes of weightlessness, and immediately after it hits zero, the speed starts going back up as that crew capsule starts going back down. So there we are at zero. It's happened. The capsule has reached apogee. Right. We imagine Jeff Bezos and his crew are floating around weightless inside that capsule right now, and that they are all feeling that feeling that is so coveted, so rare, that so few humans have felt. Now, you're going to see the booster coming down first. So the lower portion of your screen, that will be the booster descending back to Earth. The crew capsule will descend after that. John and Tom?
An original image, John, something I'm still not used to, a booster of a lighter color and the capsule a brighter white, separating apart as they come up to apogee, and, or I should say coming down. And John, it's just an absolutely original idea. No one thought of this Mercury, Gemini, Apollo.
Just absolutely stunning, Tom. And I say it completes in about 3 minutes' time. That's when the reusable New Shepard booster actually lands back down on Earth. And then we get the experience that I think everyone who goes in space wants to see. We know the cost of it for Virgin Galactic, Tom. It's about 200K, 250K. We still don't know what this is going to cost people if they would like to follow in the footsteps of Jeff Bezos and the other three.
You know, I got to admit, you're 1 minute warning and you're on a Boeing flight over to LHR and they tell you to get back in your seat and buckle up. This is a little more important, John.
Tom, I've got to say, this is a little bit different to the transatlantic flight that you and I would take. Let's head back in and take a listen to the events as they unfold.
2,000 miles an hour. Everybody in?
First step, status check. Astronaut Oliver.
Oh, wow. Oliver, status check. Oh, sorry.
Blue Control, Oliver, status perfect. In seat.
Copy, Astronaut Wally.
Wally.
Blue Control, Wally is in seat.
Copy, Astronaut Demo.
Astronaut demo, right by seat.
Copy, Astronaut Bezos. Copy.
Thank you again, everybody, for joining us live for our first.
And you heard it right there, Tom. Astronaut Bezos, astronaut Wally, astronaut Damon, and the returning of the booster, the New Shepard booster returning back to Earth, Tom. You can see the coming back down to Earth in about the next 50 seconds. That should be landing, Tom.
On radio, it's just absolutely extraordinary. The flames now hitting on the ground, the booster landing here. I will have to see where it is in the market. Looks pretty good right now. John, let's let the smoke clear before we go back to Emily Chang to be sure. Yeah, look at that.
Booster
John.
touchdown, Tom.
It's just amazing.
It's phenomenal, isn't it?
It's like parallel parking on Fifth Avenue.
Yeah,
some can do it and some
look,
can't.
You and I can't do it. Let's confirm that right here for our audience. Emily Chang, let's bring you back into the conversation. The reusable New Shepard booster is back on Earth. Just walk us through what's taking place right now in the capsule.
The booster is back on Earth, and as it was coming down, we heard that sonic boom that we knew we would hear if everything was going right. It landed safely the way it was supposed to on the launch pad, and it looks like it's ready to go back up there. John, the key is reusability, bringing that cost down, using these rockets over and over again. When that booster landed, we heard cheers from the crowd. You've got a lot of devoted people, employees who have been working here for years, watching this, and now we are watching that crew capsule float on down. Those are the drogue parachutes, the small parachutes that are used especially for vehicles at very, very high velocity. They're designed to slow that capsule down as it speeds back towards Earth, and these are the main parachutes. We're looking for full inflation here of the main parachutes that will slow the capsule down as it approaches Earth to bring it in for a safe landing. The retro thrust system will kick in, basically pushing out a cloud of air below the capsule, and we expect it to land in a cloud of desert dust. Look at that, it's getting closer and closer to the ground, just 1,600 feet above the ground right now. You can imagine this is the culmination of a live stream for Jeff Bezos, for Wally Funk, as John, you've been talking about, an icon of aviation for Mark Bezos, Jeff Bezos' brother, and for 18-year-old Oliver Damon. There you see the crew capsule descending back to Earth. There are multiple vehicles on the ground in a grid pattern waiting to zoom in as soon as touchdown happens here.
Emily, thank you. That capsule, Tom Keene, 800 feet away.
It's just amazing to see, and of course the debate of land versus sea 40 and 50, 60 years ago, and now routinely done on land. Let us listen in right now.
And it's touchdown.
And
Capsule touchdown. Tom Keene, that looks successful to me. I don't know about you.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I believe it is successful. Amazing to me, John, to see the speed of which they seem to be dropping, and yet a very gentle landing.
The hatch is due to open, Tom, I understand, in the next 10 minutes or so we might have to wait a little while to see who comes out of first. The picture's on your screen, though, for our audience worldwide. If you're listening on Bloomberg Radio, the booster successfully touching down. The capsule, so far at least from what we can see, successfully launching down. I believe you can hear from Jeff Bezos, so let's take a listen.
Copy, first up. You have a very happy Capcom here as well. Let's do a status check. Astronaut Oliver.
Control, astronaut Oliver, status correct.
Copy. Astronaut. Copy. Astronaut Demo.
Astronaut Demo, I am unbelievably good.
Copy.
Blue Control, Bezos, best day ever.
Copy, everyone. Go ahead and remain in your seats. Crew member 7 is on their way. Shortly, you will hear the capsule off-gassing.
anybody have to our altitude or navigate? I didn't. Did we ask? No, they probably did. We'll find out. It's okay. I had, my main mission was accomplished. I didn't kick anyone. That's fine. That was only about 5 minutes. Yeah.
Tom Keene, that looks like a successful mission. The astronauts checked in, the capsule successfully returning to land. That hatch is due to open in 5 or so minutes' time.
The capsule landing in the triangle of the 3 parachutes laid out on the Texas desert, or the plains, I guess I would call it, in a light green scrub. We say good morning on Bloomberg Radio, on television. It's just extraordinary images of a return to space. Chad Anderson with us, and a perfect time to speak to him as Blue Origin is gathered in celebration here. I guess a flawless mission is our first take. What does that signal for Mr. Bezos, for Mr. Musk? What does that signal for Chad Anderson?
I mean, they've been flawless since the beginning. This is their 16th flight, and they've all been flawless. It's really great to see. We now officially have 2 suborbital vehicles online that are taking humans to space. They're going to start doing so regularly. Mm-hmm. We have SpaceX is taking NASA to the space station. They have private missions lined up. Later this year, and this is a new era in human spaceflight.
Right. Why is NASA focused on the efforts of Mr. Musk and not on those of Mr. Bezos?
Well, there's been a lot of comparison between Virgin Galactic and Bezos and Blue Origin, actually, but the ambitions of Blue Origin are much more aligned with SpaceX. This is the first step in what their, much larger ambition.
What does Mr. Musk learn from what we've seen this morning?
Well, I think he's wished them well, and I'm sure that he's happy to see this success happen. It's happened. He's been a leader in a number of other categories, in Tesla as well, and he's happy to see other electric vehicles coming online. I imagine he's got a similar sentiment here. One company does not make a market. And so it's great to see the increased competition driving further innovation.
Chad, let's go to John Ferro as we see the SUV pull up to the capsule, John.
2 vehicles approaching the capsule, 1 individual running towards it. Tom, just waving at the astronauts inside. They're going to open up that hatch any moment from now, Tom. Any moment now, that hatch will be opened.
So many of the memories here, folks, and it's not only Alan Shepard being yanked out of the ocean and Gus Grissom with the capsule going down into the ocean, but it's always an important mission. Now, I would assume, John, that the weightlessness issue here of the shuttle and the space station is not an issue. When you're up for 11 minutes, I mean, what can happen?
Tom, it certainly goes quickly, that's for sure. I can see Jeff Bezos inside reaching for his cowboy hat, Tom. I think that's going on right now as they go to open up that capsule. We were taking bets on who would exit first. Tom, who went in first? I think Jeff Bezos went in first, so I'm pretty sure that Mr. Bezos is going to be first out.
Did they come out and say, I'm going to Disneyland? I mean, is that part of the...
I don't think this is the Super Bowl, Tom. Tom, this is not the Super Bowl. Or the way some people have delivered the coverage of this, you'd expect it to be just as large. It's the what next of this, Tom. It's the what next of this. This was the first time for this company. What next?
Craig, let's go. Chad, let's go. Excuse me. Chad, let's go to you quickly here. What is the next here that you observe?
I mean, there's going to be more of these flights. They've got more lined up. And interestingly, I mean, it's going to be interesting to see where they price this thing, how many people are going. We know that 7,500 people put in bids in this auction, paying up to $28 million. And there was thousands of people who paid, any variation. And so it'll be interesting to see where they end up, how Virgin responds, and where Blue Origin goes next.
John, let's describe the scene for radio here. We've got a mic up like they use for us on Bloomberg surveillance to be sure they get it with tone, but certainly a different scene than anything I've seen from NASA before, John.
I can count 1, 2, 3, 4 individuals working on opening up that capsule, Tom. It's going to take a couple of moments, I think. You can just about see Jeff Bezos inside the capsule, waving around and giving the thumbs up as we wait for that to open up. I want to bring in our colleague, Emily Chang, as we await this moment. Emily, your thoughts on what's developed in the past hour?
John, Tom, I mean, we all have covered a lot of stories in our lives. Some of them are more memorable than others. I have to say, this is one for the history books. This is, it's hard not to get caught up in the energy and the history of this moment. I mean, it's one small step for Jeff Bezos, perhaps one giant leap for space tourism and space exploration. And the vision that Bezos has articulated goes so far beyond just people having a joyride in space. space. He has talked about building this road to space, the infrastructure that other entrepreneurs can build on. He's talked about the fact that when he started Amazon, he didn't have to start new credit card systems. All of that was in place. We had a mail service that could deliver packages to you. Space, however, is much more undiscovered. There is no infrastructure. He wants to build that infrastructure so space entrepreneurs of the future can build a whole new generation of Amazons out there. And so it'll be interesting to see what he has to say as he steps off this flight and whether or not the experience has changed him or this vision at all. But obviously this is a suborbital flight. Blue Origin working on orbital flights with the New Glenn. That will be their next big project. We spoke to a lead designer who said they're on track for that to be done before the end of next year. So who knows? Jeff Bezos could be up there again on an orbital flight.
I believe that hatch door is about to open any moment now to see who comes out of that capsule first. The astronauts inside are standing up. They're standing up, Tom, as we await that door to open, perhaps in the next couple of seconds.
They're going to descend down, John, and, it's going to be a great moment. The stairs, John, frankly, look like the ones we have for the Gulfstream.
The hatch door has opened to the capsule, Tom. Exiting first is Jeff Bezos, donning that cowboy hat that he's been wearing over the last week or so, Tom. After him, the first teenager, the first human flight, the youngest ever astronaut there, Tom. And there you go. Tom, we keep talking about this moment. For the 82-year-old aviation icon, just phenomenal. And his brother, the last out of the capsule.
Gather around, I would say 40 or 50 people in the Texas desert. For those of you on Bloomberg Radio, it's being filmed. It will be part of their propaganda, if you will, of the further flights to be had. But what absolutely stuns me, John, is this truly appears to be absolute flawless execution.
Again, here a successful launch and landing of the New Shepard rocket and crew capsule with our first human flight crew there. Jeff Bezos, Mark Bezos, Oliver Damon, and Wally Funk. And their families there giving big hugs all around. What a moment, so much emotion from all of them. The elation. Did you see Wally? Did you see Wally when she came out? This. I told you she was probably going to do a summer, cartwheel as she came out of that capsule. What an incredible, incredible day.
A successful mission for an S-16 for Jeff Bezos, Mark Bezos, Oliver Damon, and for Wally Funk. Emily Chang, to bring you back into the conversation. We keep talking about the what next of it. What have we achieved today that was not achieved 2 weekends ago?
John, I have to say, from everything that I could tell, this was an extremely successful mission. This was an opportunity for Jeff Bezos to demonstrate Blue Origin's technology to the world. This is after a 21-year journey. Delays, design changes, losing out on contracts, government contracts, important government contracts to SpaceX. And up to this point, SpaceX has very much been seen as the leader in this industry. SpaceX has orbital rockets and is already making trips to the International Space Station and taking astronauts there. This validates that Blue Origin has the capability, and you wonder, you have to assume certainly that the folks at NASA are watching, and you wonder if this changes something for NASA as well.
We welcome you all to our coverage with the markets opening. John, we have to say within the markets, and I want to go to Stenovec here, but John, we have to say that as we have had this launch, we've had an adjustment in the 10-year yield to a lower yield. That is worth noting as we enter a Tuesday trading day.
Your 10-year yield right now, 113 on 10s, yields in about 5-6 basis points. For the broader market, your equity market around the opening bell, positive just 0.15% on the open, up 6 points. It's worth highlighting, Tom, that for many, many people, they do not like what they hear and what they see around this story this morning. As Emily points out, today that was a successful mission for this company. There are many people, though, that would like to see Jeff Bezos do a whole lot more on planet Earth than what he's just done in the last 1 hour.
Yeah, and one of the stark things here, folks, is almost like an athletic locker room. They're breaking out the champagne. For those of you on Bloomberg Radio, we can always describe a champagne moment. Tim Stenovec, that is one of the stark differences here between private enterprise. You wouldn't see that with a government NASA effort as well. I mean, we're really seeing a private enterprise. Tim Stenovec, where does it go from here?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It goes a lot of different places. For Blue Origin, they have 2 more of these flights later this year. They're shooting for late September, early October. Unclear, as we heard earlier, how much those are going to cost. The company has much, much bigger ambitions, though, beyond space tourism. Jeff Bezos has talked about his vision for the future. He's said in the past that if we can get 1 trillion people, that's right, 1 trillion people into the solar system, that means we have 1,000 Einsteins and 1,000 Mozarts. The idea is that the Earth cannot sustain us, and in order for materials, in order for energy, we have to explore further. You know, he was asked earlier this week about the idea that why focus on space when we have so many problems here at home? And his answer was, well, first of all, I think we can do both at the same time. And indeed, in recent years, he has increased his investments with his own philanthropy, but he is behind many other people of immense wealth. The other element of that is that he said it's always important for us to be exploring. It's always important for us to be looking ahead. And he says we can do both of those things at the same time.
I think it's right to sit on this conversation. Tom, you, like me, Emily, I'm sure as well, and Tim too. Over the last hour, we've built up to this moment this morning. For Blue Origin, a momentous occasion, truly historic. But for many people, the frustration, the amount of messages that I've received in the last 60 minutes criticizing not just this coverage, but the event itself. Emily, Chang, just to go over the mission statement of Blue Origin that you and I discussed a little bit earlier this morning, I think it's worth sharing a couple of lines with our audience. Blue Origin believes that in order to preserve Earth, our home, for our grandchildren's grandchildren, we must go to space to tap its unlimited resources and energy. For Jeff Bezos and others, Emily, there is no distinction between the work that needs to be done on Earth and the work that he thinks needs to be done in space.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think that Jeff Bezos and Blue Origin, part of the opportunity here is for them to explain that vision. This has been a very secretive company for 21 years. Until today, only one journalist had ever visited Blue Origin headquarters. Today, they're open to the national press. We are all here watching this moment and wanting Jeff Bezos to articulate what that vision is. Why is he spending so much of his money exploring space for this 11-minute trip up and down? How does that help us on Earth? And what he has said is, I want to continue living on Earth. This is the best planet. We love it here, but we need to protect it. We're going to run out of energy. We need to go to space in order to mine that energy from the sun, from the moon. We don't need to go to Mars. Mars is inhospitable. We will not enjoy it there. We don't want to live on the moon either. We want to live on these space colonies, as he's described it, where it's like Maui every day and you can go back and forth to Earth whenever you want. This is hundreds of years out, but he imagines big industry in space, residential and light industry here on Earth. And Blue Origin, he wants to be a huge part of the infrastructure in building out that space economy.
The eyes of the world on the desert land just outside of Van Horn, West Texas. Right now, 8:37 local time, 9:37 in New York, Tom. So allow me to check in on the markets just briefly. 7 minutes into the session. It has been a huge 24 hours for this market. Equities up by 1/3 of 1%. With your bounce back, this is what it looks like as follows. On the S&P 500, advancing just a little bit, 12, 13 points higher. But once again, Tom, it's the bond market that gets your attention. And maybe the bond market pales in comparison to what we've seen in the last hour or so. But your 10-year right now, just south of 114, Tom, down 5 basis points on the day.
I'm going to brag for the 108th mayor of New York and for Thomas Secundo when they did their innovation of inventing the Bloomberg terminal, John. It was absolutely original that you could go from what was called a Monroe trader to convexity and duration math and then to immediate log analysis of charts. I can tell you, John, it was just like what you're watching with Mr. Bezos on the Texas desert. The 10-year yield right now, John, is a textbook chart of lower highs on yield. It has been 1, 2, 3, and on back over the last 15 days or so. It is stunning to see price up and yield down to a 1.1392. John, we have to begin to be on the 0.99 watch.
Unbelievable. For our audience worldwide on Bloomberg TV and radio, and of course for our audience on Bloomberg QuickTake, the coverage continues with Tom Keene, myself, Jonathan Ferro, alongside our good friends and colleagues Emily Chang and Tim Stenovec. We'll continue to cover the markets, but also this event. Tom, I talked about the late 90s and Amazon and the kind of people that threw mud at that company and its valuation. Why would this company be valued what it's valued when it's just an online bookseller without the vision of what this could become? And I'm conscious of that particular moment in the late 90s and conditioned by it because I do not want that clip to play in 20 years' time of me repeating that same error. Throwing mud at a mission that's taken place in the last hour without any imagination on what this momentum can develop, what this moment can develop into. Yes, Amazon had a crazy valuation, but it became something so much bigger than just an online bookseller. And you wonder if Jeff Bezos can repeat the act, Tom, with Blue Origin.
Well, it's a repeat the act, but it's a strategic plan to move forward. And again, they have that plan in Shepard, a single-engine rocket, which will be put on top of a larger rocket, and that will be called Glenn. Chad Anderson knows this with Space Capital and continues with his patient this morning at this historic moment. What's after Glenn? Does Jeff Bezos want to go to the moon?
He does. He's working with a consortium of he's partnered up with a few of the incumbents, and was competing for a contract that he lost out on to Musk and SpaceX, and they've fought against that, and it looks like they're going to press ahead. SpaceX was the only one that put in a bid that was affordable.
Frame this, and you're very good at this. Frame for this now: China doing a Matt Damon equivalency on Mars. We're out on Mars with a helicopter that goes around. There's government interest. There's international interest. There's private billionaire interest as well. How do they dovetail together in 2031?
Well, this is how so many new markets and nascent markets develop. The government is an early investor in the technology risk and in the R&D, and that's what we've seen over the last 50 or 60 years in space. And then with the retirement of the space shuttle, we were basically saying this has become routine, getting to orbit, and it's become too expensive. And in order to keep doing this, we need to work with commercial partners. And that's what, SpaceX 10 years ago was able to break through kind of the deadlock of the defense contractors who kind of had a tight grip on this market. And they've lowered the prices. I mean, they are allowing NASA to do more with their limited budget, resupplying the space station, taking astronauts to the space station, maintaining the station, and also going out to deeper space missions and exploring the solar system.
Let's get some final thoughts from our colleagues on the ground. Emily Chang, I want to come to you first, please.
John, you were asking about lunar ambitions, and what's so fascinating about this entire design process that has, of course, taken place over 21 years here at Blue Origin is they have built their future ambition going out hundreds of years into the design of the rocket that Jeff Bezos sat on today. The rocket is powered by hydrogen and oxygen, a very simple mixture. And on the moon, what do you find but water, hydrogen, and oxygen? So the idea is that once a rocket presumably lands on a moon, a Blue Origin rocket, they can turn what's on the moon into rocket fuel to get that rocket back to Earth, to power it through the space economy. And, what I would say is what we have witnessed today is nothing short of extraordinary. Sure, I know there are people out there who are unhappy with how Jeff Bezos is spending his time, but this is an incredible fleet. The birth of private space industry, the idea that we don't have to rely on governments to get to space, that private citizens can go there if they want to on their own craft. So this up and down suborbital mission, this is just the tip of a very long journey. It's orbital missions next, perhaps lunar missions after that, all building towards this future space ecosystem that Jeff Bezos has envisioned.
Emily, I know you've got to run. Where have you got to run to? You've got to go get an interview with Jeff Bezos, is that right?
I've got to go have a very important conversation, and we're going to get it back to you as fast as we possibly can.
I'm looking forward to that. Emily, you run away. It's been great to catch up. Thanks for your help this morning. Tim Stenovec, you've had problems with the audio all morning. I'm going to take another shot at this and give you a final word. Tim, are you there?
I'm here, and all is good here in Van Horn. You know, when the New Shepard went up, it was silent here in Van Horn. I was able to see the trail left by the rocket motor as it exceeded hundreds of thousands of feet. One thing that I have been thinking a lot about, though, is what comes next. And we know what comes next for Blue Origin, but there's a lot that we don't know about what comes next. I mean, think about where we were 60 years ago after Shepard's journey into space. We didn't imagine that where we'd be sitting, we'd be able to do satellite technology that would allow me to be talking to you guys, or even potentially imagine that we could do global positioning systems so easily, or use global positioning systems to monitor climate change, or what Elon Musk is doing with Starlink, delivering internet to areas all over the world. The fact is even though these billionaires, these entrepreneurs, they do have these grand visions, the idea of what we could be seeing in the next 10, 20 years, we don't even know yet what that looks like.
Tim Stenovec, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it this morning from Van Horn, Texas. Right now, as we move forward, and again, this with an equity lift in the market up 228 points, and the bond market with those lower yields, we continue with one final discussion here on our moment in space, and that is the engineering of our many space programs. Daniel Wood is expert at this, director of Space-Enabled Research Group at MIT Media Lab, who dovetails a lot of social efforts and social policy into grunt engineering. And I say that, Danielle, with immense respect. There's that scene, Danielle, in Apollo 13 where they're going to die. And the three engineers are in mission control, and they got the canister, and they're going to purify the oxygen, or the astronauts are going to die, and they all pull out and sync their Kufel-and-Hess or slide rules. We are so far removed from the slide rules of a busted Apollo mission. What is the technology forward that we will see from this private enterprise?
It's wonderful to celebrate today. I'm so happy for Wally Funk and for somebody like her who's had such a long road to this road to space. And we can think about the technology by asking, what has been the road for all the companies? I was in college watching the Ansari X Prize. I want to appreciate Nisha Ansari, who helped fund some of the early investments by private companies trying to demonstrate the ability to put a human into space through a suborbital mission several times in a row. And what we're seeing today, with multiple launches by private companies, is part of this long journey. There's also been a great coordination between government and private sector. I used to work for NASA, and NASA has within its congressional mandate something called the Space Act Agreement capability, meaning they can make agreements with organizations that are private sector organizations to share engineering knowledge and experience on spaceflight.
Professor Wood, you were at Kennedy Center, I'm sorry, it's Cape Canaveral, Professor, just so you know, for some of us that are of a certain age. You were an intern there, and I'm sure in your Orlando and your Central Florida, you were grilled, why are we doing this? Explain now, why are we doing this in 2021?
Everyone on Earth is benefiting from the investments that governments and the private sector are making in space. I travel all over the world, and I engage with leaders of countries in Africa, Latin America, the Caribbean, Southeast Asia. Countries on every continent are investing in space infrastructure and are looking for ways for private companies to play a role in the space ecosystem, because space brings us many benefits through observing the environment, understanding and responding to climate change, managing our fragile coastlines, and also thinking about providing services. But even human spaceflight and microgravity research helps us transfer benefits from space back to Earth. We understand better how to recycle water, how to recycle air, and make ecosystems that are clean, whether they're artificial, but also on Earth. And we also understand better how our bodies and plants and animals respond in an environment like a microgravity, which explains their fundamental physics better. There's also the inspiration side. I am running a program at MIT called Zero Robotics, and we're inviting middle school students from around the country to learn about space robotics and how to code. And one day we hope to do this with a collaboration with the space station and expose them to the space station, which has been done before in the past. And so these opportunities inspire the next generation of leaders as well.
The great fear here is that will be a success for the elites. As you well know, we have two Americas. How do we translate technological innovation? How do we translate, as Brynjolfsson and McAfee talk about, the race against the machine? How do we translate this technology over to the have-nots, the technological have-nots? have-nots of America?
I spend a lot of my time thinking about how we can do engineering design in a way that's equitable, advances environmental sustainability, and economic justice. This means first asking who's involved, ensuring that we have increased diversity and access to technology. It also means designing these space systems in a way that directly serves the needs of those who've experienced environmental injustice or long-term discrimination. It also means listening to groups like indigenous communities that have concerns, cultural questions about what humans do in space, for example, thinking of the moon as a sacred place. So there's a lot of ways we can use space technology to provide services, like disaster response, for example. And we can also then listen to those who usually don't have a strong chance to give their view on what we do in space. Because we're about to make some key decisions as a human race on how we treat the space environment. And I think we need more voices involved in this going forward.
Danielle, just a final word from you. You mentioned the public-private partnerships, and I think it's spot on to point that out. But for many of these efforts, they're increasingly privatized, and the gains will be shared with the shareholders. And I wonder your thoughts on that as we move away from strictly a government effort towards something much more highly privatized.
I think it's so important that we continue to see government infrastructure allowing services like research opportunities for universities, like internationally shared climate data that's important for everyone around the world. I hope that that becomes a public service that continues for years to come. There will also be private activities that kind of build on the government infrastructure. And I think it remains to be seen whether that's going to be only open to the elite. It is possible for private companies to consider how they can have business models that provide further openness to those who have less access or less ability to pay. But this is a choice that they need to make, and I hope they do make it.
Professor Wood, thank you so much for joining us with the MIT Media Lab, Danielle Wood, this morning. John, I think we've got to do a market check. We always need to do that with Green on the Screen, and we can use all the space innovation, John, to say, once again, I looked for a window of opportunity, and I missed it.
And you missed it.
Thank you.
42.87 on the S&P. We bounced back 0.7% after the choppiness we've seen in the last 24 hours. Here's one for you, though, Tom. Take a look at space. Take a look at Virgin Galactic and how it's trading this morning. It's down by 7.6% in early trading. Now, the leaders of these companies, when they're asked about the competition, they don't want to talk about the competition. They believe this is a joint effort to make steps and progress where we haven't made any progress for the last couple of decades. I think investors do see it slightly differently. A successful mission for Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic south of 30 at 29.90 and down 8%, Tom.
It's interesting to see. Chad Anderson with us with a final thought here. He has been more than patient. Space Capital's managing partner of the dovetail of all of this innovation, the NASA that we used to know and maybe the NASA that's still there, with where we're moving forward. And, we've talked about the next steps of these people, but to John's point, does private enterprise and private competition get in the way of space success?
Absolutely not. It's driving it forward. We started off in a place where we had never been to space. Then we launched a satellite. Then we launched a human, and then we landed on the moon. And we've been regressing ever since. And it's only thanks to private efforts that we are now accelerating back into.
So what does NASA think of this event today?
I think they think very highly of this event, and they're very happy to see the success. Again, they are benefiting from this. They are going to now be able to rely on low-cost, innovative partners, leveraging reusability and enabling them to do more with their limited budgets. I mean, this hits on a few different notes. One, the inspiration front. Two, the competition. It's driving innovation forward. And three, we wouldn't have the capability that we have today without space technology.
Can these guys in Texas cowboy hats teach anybody at JPL anything? I'm serious. I mean, or at MIT, not the Media Lab at MIT, but MIT Aeronautics, the legacy of Harold Edgerton and the rest of it. Can they teach the pros anything?
It's a great question, and
it's my only good one today, so you better go with it.
100% yes, and they learn from each other. It's a symbiotic relationship. So NASA has a lot of heritage and a lot of great, embedded expertise. They've been there and they've done that. The private sector is challenging a lot of the embedded assumptions and doing things in new ways, allowing them to do things more effectively and more cost effectively.
Chad, just quickly, investable opportunities right now. Let's close right there. Is this a single name opportunity, or do you want to play the industry as a whole?
We've gone from a very limited market 10 years ago, handful of defense contractors on one side and the government on the other. There has now been $200 billion invested in over 1,500 unique space companies over the last 10 years. This is a massive market opportunity, cuts across the infrastructure, the distribution, and the applications of that satellite data in space technology stacks such as GPS, geospatial intelligence, and communications. This is a massive market opportunity that we're just on the forefront of.
I love asking that question and seeing an investor, Tom, lean in. Just lean in and give the pitch. Give the pitch. Chad Anderson there with the pitch, Space Capital managing partner. Chad, thank you for being with us through the last couple of hours. And as we wrap up our coverage, worth pointing out that there will be a news conference following the Blue Origin space flight. The news conference taking place with Jeff Bezos coming up at about 11 Eastern time on Bloomberg Television and on Bloomberg Radio. And I'm sure our colleagues over at Bloomberg QuickTake will be carrying that as well. Tom, before we go, we've talked about the degree of criticism we've had. We've talked about the degree of support that we've had. Let me allow the words of a Bloomberg Terminal subscriber to speak just for a moment. This got sent in moments ago, and I'd like to share it with our audience. Bezos and Musk are using their own money to do things where the US government has not made a lot of progress on in the last 20 to 40 years. This individual goes on to say, I grew up watching a moon landing as a young child. The space shuttle launched in Florida when in high school, and have a signed picture from Apollo 15, John Irwin, on my wall. People saying they should do more on Earth ignores the great advances in technology that pushing into space helped drive, and if nothing else, sparking the imagination of the world's youth to try things that haven't been done before. Now, if we say something has been successful today, Tom, just as far as that statement's concerned, I think the effort towards that, I think we've seen a success this morning.
Well, as Mr. Bezos said, I don't need to say it. Mr. Bezos can say it. We can do both. And that's always been the rationalization.
And they are trying to do both. For our audience worldwide, on Bloomberg Television, on Bloomberg Radio, on Bloomberg QuickTake, that does it for our coverage right here. I want to turn to the price section and get you up to speed on what's going on in this market.
Oh, there you go. Back to the boring market.
I've got to go there, Tom. Come on.
Oh, it's your show. I forgot. Excuse me.
My show's like a minute long today.
I'm over time.
Can you indulge me 60 seconds?
Please.
Can you let me do it? The S&P at 4288. We advanced 30 points. We're up 0.7%. Tom, the Dow doesn't even make it into my show. I'm only doing this just for you. We're advancing how many points? It's an epic surge, up 400. We're up a little more than 1.2%. That needs an American accent, doesn't it? The Nasdaq up 40, advancing a third of 1%. But once again, Tom, it's the bond market that dominates the coverage this morning. Your 10-year comfortably below 120 at 116.
John, what I like is your Grand Bank's 48 is named Epic Surge. I just think that's great.
That does it for our coverage. Alongside Tom Keene, I'm Jonathan Ferro. A special thanks to our colleagues Emily Chang and Tim Stenovec over at Bloomberg QuickTake. For our audience worldwide, from New York City with the eyes of the world, for the last couple of hours at least, very much on a small town in West Texas and the desert just outside of it, in Van Horn. Congratulations to Jeff Bezos of Blue Origin. From New York, a successful launch, a successful touchdown back to Earth. This is Bloomberg.